Someone opened their heart to your soulmate today. They need to tell you about it. Open this now. My beloved child. Something happened today that your soulmate wasn't prepared for. Someone sat across from them, looked them directly in the eyes, and opened their heart in a way that changed the entire mood of the conversation. At first, your soulmate thought it would be an ordinary talk. It wasn't. This person admitted something deeply personal, then said something about you that made your soulmate suddenly go quiet. They didn't argue. They didn't change the subject. They simply listened, because somewhere inside, they knew these words were touching a truth they had been trying not to face. And now there is something your soulmate feels they need to tell you, but the most important part is what happened immediately after that confession. The person speaking to them wasn't trying to pull them away from you. In fact, it was almost the opposite. They admitted that they had noticed a change in your soulmate whenever your name, your memory, or anything connected to you came up. They had seen the hesitation. The hidden emotion. The way your soulmate could pretend everything was fine until one small reminder of you changed their expression. Then came the question that caught your soulmate completely off guard. If this person means so much to you, why are you still holding back? Your soulmate had no quick answer. For several seconds, there was only silence. And that silence revealed more than any explanation could have. Don't skip, because what your soulmate finally admitted next was something they had apparently struggled to say even to themselves. They confessed that the distance between you has never felt as simple as it might appear from the outside. There were words they wanted to say, moments when they almost reached out, and feelings they kept pushing down because they feared what would happen once everything became real. But hearing another person speak so openly today forced them to see their own silence differently. Suddenly, keeping everything hidden didn't feel safe anymore. It felt like a risk, the risk of losing the chance to tell you what was actually happening inside their heart. And before that conversation ended, your soulmate made a quiet decision. They would stop pretending there was nothing left to say. But there was one final thing the other person told them before walking away, and those words may be the reason your soulmate is now closer than ever to revealing the truth to you. Those final words stayed with your soulmate long after the conversation ended. Silence can make someone believe they never mattered to you. That sentence hit harder than expected. Your soulmate immediately thought about the moments when you may have waited for clarity and received nothing but distance. They remembered the things they almost told you, the messages they considered sending, and the times fear convinced them to wait a little longer. But now they're beginning to wonder whether waiting has already said something they never intended. And that realization brought another question they could no longer avoid. What if you've started believing their silence means they stopped caring? What happened next was even more revealing. Your soulmate finally admitted to this person that there is something specific they have wanted you to know for a long time. It isn't simply, "I miss you." The truth goes deeper than that. They confess that something changed inside them after a particular moment involving you, and they have never completely returned to who they were before it. They tried distracting themselves. They tried convincing themselves that time would make the feeling quieter. Yet whenever they imagined truly moving forward without you, something inside resisted. The person listening noticed the emotion immediately and asked, "Then why haven't you told them?" Your soulmate lowered their eyes, because the answer exposed the real reason behind everything. It wasn't because they had nothing to say. It was because saying it would make them vulnerable in a way they weren't sure they could handle. They feared discovering that you no longer felt the same, or that they had waited too long and missed their chance. But today's conversation shifted something. For the first time, your soulmate began thinking that the greater risk might be never telling you at all. Stay till the end, because before they walked away, the person who opened their heart gave your soulmate one unexpected piece of advice. Your soulmate didn't respond immediately, but later, alone with their thoughts, they made a decision connected directly to you. And what they decided may explain why something between you could soon feel very different. Later, when your soulmate was finally alone, that advice returned with surprising force. Tell them the truth before fear chooses the ending for you. They kept replaying it because it touched the exact place they had been protecting. For so long, they believed staying quiet gave them control. If they never revealed everything, they couldn't be rejected, misunderstood, or forced to face feelings they weren't ready to explain. But today they saw the other side of that choice. Silence wasn't protecting the connection anymore. It was creating questions between you. And suddenly, your soulmate began wondering whether you had been waiting for the very truth they were afraid to speak. That realization led them toward something they had avoided doing. They began mentally forming the words they would say if you were standing in front of them right now. Not a perfect speech. Not some dramatic confession. Just the truth. They wanted you to know that their distance never told the whole story. There were moments when they wanted to come closer but stopped themselves at the last second. There were nights when they wondered whether you could somehow sense what they were holding back. And there was one particular feeling they had never admitted openly. The possibility of losing you completely scares them more than allowing you to see how deeply this connection has affected them. But even that wasn't the biggest realization waiting for them. Because while replaying today's conversation, your soulmate suddenly understood why that person had chosen today to open their heart. Something had happened before they spoke. Something connected to the way your soulmate had been acting whenever you came up. Apparently, their feelings had become much harder to hide than they realized. A hesitation. A change in their voice. A reaction that someone close enough could recognize immediately. And when your soulmate finally asked, "What exactly did you notice?" the answer caught them completely off guard. Because this person hadn't noticed just one sign. They had been watching the pattern for longer than your soulmate ever suspected, and what they revealed next made your soulmate realize their secret feelings may not be secret anymore. The pattern had been impossible to miss. This person told your soulmate that whenever they seemed ready to move forward, one small reminder of you changed everything. A familiar place. A certain phrase. Even an ordinary conversation about relationships could make your soulmate suddenly distant and thoughtful. At first, nobody questioned it. But after seeing it happen repeatedly, this person understood something your soulmate had worked hard to hide. Whatever exists between you was never emotionally finished. Then they said, "You don't react like someone who has let go." Your soulmate froze, because those words exposed exactly what they had refused to admit. Instead of denying it, your soulmate asked a question: "Do you really think they would still want to hear from me?" That question revealed where their fear had been hiding all along. They weren't only afraid of expressing their feelings. They were afraid that you might have changed while they were silent. The person answered carefully, saying they couldn't know what was in your heart, but they knew pretending not to care would never give your soulmate the answer. That was when something shifted. Your soulmate realized they had spent too much time trying to predict your response instead of giving you the chance to respond for yourself. And suddenly, telling you the truth felt less frightening than continuing to wonder. But there was still one thing holding them back. Before they could reach out, your soulmate felt they needed to explain why they had stayed silent for so long. There was a reason they pulled away at certain moments, and it wasn't the reason you might have assumed. Something huge is waiting for you here, because during today's conversation, your soulmate finally admitted that reason aloud for the first time. The person listening didn't judge them. They simply stared for a moment and said, "Then that is exactly what you need to tell them." And what your soulmate confessed next could completely change how you understand their silence. What your soulmate finally confessed was more personal than the other person expected. They admitted that they didn't create distance because their feelings disappeared. They created distance because those feelings had become too real, too difficult to control, and impossible to treat like something temporary. The closer they felt to you, the more they realized that eventually they would have to make a choice, either open their heart completely or risk watching this connection slowly disappear. And for someone who had spent so much time protecting themselves from disappointment, that choice terrified them. They had convinced themselves that waiting would make everything clearer, but instead, every quiet day seemed to create another unanswered question. Then the person sitting with them asked something that made your soulmate's expression change instantly. What if they interpreted your fear as rejection? Your soulmate didn't answer. They simply looked away, because suddenly they were seeing their silence through your eyes. That question stayed between them for several seconds before your soulmate finally admitted something else. There had been moments when they wanted to reach out to you more than you could possibly know. They had imagined conversations with you, rehearsed explanations in their head, and even thought about what they would say if you unexpectedly appeared in front of them. But every time they came close to doing something real, another thought stopped them. What if you had already decided to move on? What if their silence had lasted long enough for you to stop waiting? The person listening didn't offer false reassurance. Instead, they said, "You can't know what they feel if you never give them the truth." Those words changed the energy completely. Your soulmate realized they had been trying to predict your answer without ever giving you the opportunity to give one. And for the first time today, they began thinking seriously about what honesty might actually look like. Then came the moment that surprised even the person sitting beside them. Your soulmate reached for their phone. They unlocked it, stared at the screen, and remained still for several seconds. Their fingers moved as though they were about to type something, then stopped. They weren't afraid because they had nothing to say. They were afraid because there was suddenly too much to say. How could they explain the distance, the hidden feelings, the missed opportunities, and everything today's conversation had forced them to realize? They typed a few words, erased them, then started again. This time, one sentence remained on the screen longer than everything else. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't complicated. But it carried the truth they had avoided for far too long. And just before they decided whether to send it, the person beside them noticed those words and quietly asked, are you finally ready to tell them what you really want? Your soulmate's answer changed what happened next. Your soulmate didn't answer that question immediately. They kept looking at the unfinished message on their screen, almost as if saying the truth aloud would make it impossible to hide from anymore. Then, quietly, they admitted, "I don't want to lose them," without ever giving them the truth. That was the first time today they stopped talking about fear and started talking about what they actually wanted. The person beside them noticed it too. Until that moment, your soulmate had explained every hesitation, every reason for waiting, every possibility that could go wrong. But now there was something stronger underneath all of it. They wanted another chance to speak honestly with you. They wanted to know whether the connection they still carried had a place in your heart too. And most importantly, they wanted you to understand that their silence had never meant you were forgotten. But there was still one truth they were afraid to put into that message, because once you knew it, there would be no pretending this connection had meant less than it really did. The person who had opened their heart earlier leaned closer and asked, "What are you still leaving out?" Your soulmate tried to brush the question aside, but they couldn't. After everything that had already been said, hiding the biggest piece suddenly felt pointless. So they admitted that there had been a specific moment when they realized their feelings for you were deeper than they had expected. It wasn't during some dramatic event. It happened during an ordinary moment when something reminded them of you, and their first instinct was to reach for you, to tell you what happened, to hear your response, to feel that familiar connection again. That was when they understood you had become more than someone they simply thought about. You had become the person they instinctively wanted to share things with. And instead of making them feel safe, that realization frightened them, because it showed them exactly how much losing you could hurt. "Did you ever tell them that?" the person asked. Your soulmate shook their head, and what came next made the conversation even more serious. Because the person beside them finally said what nobody had been willing to say before. Then they may have been judging your feelings by your actions, while your real feelings stayed hidden. Your soulmate knew immediately how true that was. You could only respond to what they had shown you, not everything they had secretly carried. That realization made them look back at the message on their phone differently. They erased one cautious sentence and replaced it with something more honest. Something that didn't hide behind vague words or pretend this was just a casual conversation they wanted to have. Don't skip, because this was the first time your soulmate came close to revealing what they actually wanted from you now. Their finger hovered near the screen, but before they could make a decision, the person beside them asked one final question. If they gave you one real chance to speak from your heart, what would you ask them for? And your soulmate's answer revealed a desire they had never admitted before. Your soulmate finally answered, and the words came out softer than expected. "I would ask them to hear me before deciding what my silence meant." They weren't asking for everything to instantly return to the way it once felt. They weren't expecting you to erase every unanswered question. What they wanted was one honest opportunity to explain what had really been happening inside them while they appeared distant on the outside. They wanted to tell you about the times they nearly reached out, the moments they wondered whether you still thought about them, and the fear that kept convincing them tomorrow would somehow be easier than today. But then your soulmate admitted something even more revealing. If you gave them that chance, they wouldn't only explain the past. There was something they wanted to ask you about the future. The person beside them immediately noticed the difference and said, "So this isn't only about clearing your conscience. You still want something with them." Your soulmate went completely quiet, because that sentence had finally named the truth they were still trying to approach carefully. For several moments, they stared at the unfinished message again. Then your soulmate admitted that yes, part of them still wonders what could happen if the two of you stopped guessing and finally spoke honestly. They have imagined hearing your voice without all the uncertainty between you. They have wondered whether the connection would still feel familiar if you were both allowed to say everything you had held back. And there was one question your soulmate had secretly wanted to ask you for longer than they were willing to admit. Did you ever feel like there was something unfinished between us two? That question frightened them because your answer could change everything. Yet today's conversation had made one thing impossible to ignore: avoiding the answer was already costing them something. Every day they stayed silent, they were allowing fear to make decisions that their heart had never truly agreed with. The person who opened up to them could see the conflict clearly, and instead of comforting your soulmate, they challenged them with another question that went even deeper. They asked, if you found out tomorrow that they had finally stopped waiting for you, what would you regret not saying tonight? Your soulmate's face changed. That possibility felt different when spoken aloud. Suddenly, all the careful reasons for waiting seemed much smaller. They looked down at the phone and began typing again, but this time they didn't erase the first sentence. Then came a second. And a third. The message was becoming more honest with every line, revealing things your soulmate had never allowed themselves to say directly. They admitted that they had thought about you far more than their silence suggested. They admitted that today's conversation had forced them to confront what they could lose. But there was one sentence they hesitated over. The sentence that would reveal exactly what they hoped could still happen between you. Their finger stopped above the screen, and the person beside them read their expression before quietly asking, "Is that the part you're afraid they might actually feel too?" Your soulmate looked up, and the answer they gave opened an entirely new truth. Your soulmate gave a small nod, because that was exactly what frightened them. Rejection was one possibility, but there was another possibility they had barely allowed themselves to consider. What if you still felt it too? What if the moment they finally became honest, you admitted that you had also sensed something unfinished between you? That would mean the distance hadn't erased the connection. It would mean both of you had been carrying questions while neither knew what the other was truly thinking. Your soulmate confessed that this possibility was almost more overwhelming than hearing no, because a yes would require them to stop hiding behind uncertainty. They would have to show you the vulnerable side they had protected for so long. The person beside them listened carefully, then said, "Maybe you're not afraid of the answer. Maybe you're afraid of what you'll have to do if the answer is the one you secretly want." Those words landed differently, and your soulmate suddenly understood why they had hesitated every time they came close to reaching out. For the first time, they began describing what they would actually want if you gave them another opportunity. Nothing rushed. Nothing forced. They simply wanted a real conversation where neither of you had to decode silence or guess what the other person meant. They wanted to tell you where fear had taken over, but they also wanted to hear your side. The moments that confused you, the questions you never received answers to, and whether there was ever a point when you almost stopped believing anything remained between you. Then your soulmate said something the other person hadn't expected. I don't just want them to understand me. I need to understand what my silence did to them. That sentence showed how much today's conversation had changed their thinking. Earlier, they were focused on explaining themselves. Now they were thinking about you. And that shift led the person beside them to reveal something they had deliberately held back until this exact moment. They told your soulmate, "There's a reason I brought this up today." Immediately, your soulmate looked up. Until then, they had assumed this conversation happened because their feelings had simply become obvious. But apparently, there was more behind it. The person explained that recently your soulmate had said something about you without realizing how revealing it sounded. It was only a brief sentence, spoken during an ordinary conversation, but the emotion behind it was unmistakable. Your soulmate tried to remember what they had said, yet nothing came immediately. "What did I say?" they asked. The person hesitated, almost as if deciding whether repeating those words would push your soulmate past the point of hiding anymore. Then they revealed that your soulmate had spoken about you as though losing you wasn't something that had already happened, but something they were still terrified could happen. And when they finally repeated the exact sentence your soulmate had said, your soulmate's entire expression changed, because those words exposed a truth even deeper than the message waiting unfinished on their phone. The exact sentence was something your soulmate barely remembered saying. "I just hope they haven't closed the door on me completely." Hearing those words repeated back to them made everything suddenly feel exposed. They had said it casually, almost under their breath, believing nobody would notice what was hiding beneath it. But the person beside them had noticed. They explained that people who have truly moved on usually don't worry about whether a door is still open. They don't keep wondering whether there is still time to repair what silence damaged. Your soulmate couldn't argue with that. In that moment, they realized their feelings had been appearing in small ways for much longer than they understood. Their voice changed whenever you came up. Their attention sharpened whenever someone mentioned something connected to you. And despite every attempt to appear unaffected, one question had quietly followed them: have I waited too long? Today, someone finally forced them to confront that question instead of hiding from it. Your soulmate looked back at the message they had been writing and suddenly it seemed too careful. It explained things, but it still protected them. So they began changing it. They removed the sentences that sounded distant and replaced them with words that felt frighteningly honest. They wanted you to know that they hadn't reached out because they were certain of your response. They wanted to reach out because continuing to leave you with the wrong impression had become harder than facing whatever answer you might give. Then they added something they had never planned to admit: there are things I should have told you when I had the chance. Their hand paused after typing it. That sentence opened a much bigger door, because now they would eventually have to explain what those things were. The person beside them asked whether they were ready for that, and your soulmate surprised them by saying, "I think I'm more afraid of never saying it." But what they typed immediately afterward carried even more weight. They began writing about the future, not promises, not guarantees, but one request. They wanted one honest conversation with you where neither of you pretended the past hadn't mattered. They wanted to know what you had felt during their silence and whether there was anything you had also been unable to say. For several seconds, your soulmate stared at those words. Their finger moved toward the button that could finally put the truth in motion, then stopped again. The person beside them didn't push. Instead, they asked quietly, "What are you waiting for now?" Your soulmate took a breath and admitted there was still one thing missing from the message. Something they believed you deserved to hear before they asked anything from you. It was the hardest admission of the entire conversation because it involved a choice your soulmate had made earlier, and the real reason behind that choice was something they had never told anyone until today. That earlier choice had been haunting your soulmate more than they ever admitted. There was a moment when they could have moved closer to you, spoken clearly, and stopped the uncertainty before it grew. Instead, they stepped back. At the time, they told themselves it was the sensible thing to do. They believed distance would help them think clearly and regain control over emotions that were becoming stronger than expected. But today, sitting across from someone who had opened their heart without hiding, your soulmate finally admitted the real reason: they were testing whether they could live without this connection. They thought that if they stayed away long enough, the feelings would weaken. They expected your memory to become quieter. Instead, the opposite happened. Small things kept bringing you back into their thoughts, and every time it happened, they discovered the same uncomfortable truth: they hadn't created emotional distance at all. They had only created physical silence around feelings that were still there. When your soulmate revealed this, the person beside them asked, "And what did that distance prove to you?" Your soulmate didn't need much time to answer. It proved that avoiding you was not the same as letting you go. It proved that unanswered feelings don't disappear simply because nobody speaks about them. But then came the harder realization. While your soulmate had been using distance to understand themselves, you had been left without an explanation. You couldn't see the private battle happening inside them. You could only see what they showed you: the hesitation, the quiet, the absence. That thought clearly affected them. They admitted they had wondered many times whether you interpreted their behavior as indifference. And for the first time, they said, if they did, I gave them every reason to believe it. The person beside them immediately replied, "Then don't defend the silence. Explain it." That sentence changed what your soulmate decided to put into the message. They began typing again, but now the words were different. No excuses. No carefully polished explanation designed to make them look less vulnerable. They wrote that pulling away had been their decision, but it had never been proof that you meant nothing. They wrote that today someone had made them realize how unfair it was to expect you to understand feelings they had never expressed. Then they stopped, because one final admission remained. Stay till the end, because this was the sentence your soulmate had been avoiding from the beginning. They wanted to tell you what they discovered during all that distance, what they now know they would choose differently if given another opportunity. Their fingers hovered over the screen as they whispered the words before typing them. The person beside them heard everything, and their reaction was immediate. If that's really true, then that is the first thing they deserve to know. Your soulmate looked down at the phone again, because those words weren't merely about missing you. They revealed exactly what place you still hold in their heart, and what they are now considering doing about it. For several seconds, your soulmate couldn't bring themselves to type the words they had just spoken aloud. Saying them privately was one thing. Letting you see them was something entirely different. But eventually, they stopped editing their feelings and wrote the sentence exactly as it had come from their heart: if I could go back, I wouldn't choose distance again. I would choose the conversation I was too afraid to have with you. They stared at it, reading it twice, almost shocked by how simple the truth looked once it was finally written down. All those weeks of uncertainty, all those imagined outcomes, all those reasons for waiting, and beneath them was one regret they could no longer deny. The person beside them noticed their hesitation and asked, "Do you mean it?" Your soulmate answered immediately this time. Yes. Because distance hadn't brought the peace they expected. It had only shown them how much remained unresolved. But then the person asked a harder question. If they answer you, are you actually ready to hear what your silence felt like from their side? And suddenly your soulmate realized sending the truth was only the beginning. That question forced them to imagine something they had avoided, you speaking without protecting their feelings. What if you told them you had been confused? What if you admitted there were moments when their silence hurt you, or made you question whether anything between you had been real? Your soulmate knew they couldn't ask for honesty and then become defensive when it arrived. So they made another quiet decision. If this conversation happened, they would listen before explaining. They would let you say what you needed to say. They would answer the questions they once avoided. And if you asked why it took someone else opening their heart today to finally shake them awake, they would tell you the truth. Watching another person risk vulnerability made them recognize how much of their own life had been controlled by fear. Then tell them that too, the person said. Don't give them half the truth now. Your soulmate looked at the message again, and for the first time, it no longer felt like something they were writing just to relieve their own regret. It felt like a door they were finally offering you the choice to open. But before they could decide whether to send it, something unexpected surfaced in the conversation. The person beside them asked your soulmate whether there was anything about today specifically that had made their emotions stronger even before this heart-to-heart began. Your soulmate hesitated. That hesitation was enough. There was something. Earlier today, before anyone opened their heart to them, your soulmate had encountered a reminder of you that stopped them in their tracks. It wasn't planned, and nobody around them understood why their mood suddenly changed. They had kept that moment private because admitting its effect would have revealed too much. Now, however, they finally described what happened, and the person listening immediately understood why today had become the breaking point. Your soulmate had seen something that made them wonder whether you might be moving into a new chapter without them. And for one frightening moment, they imagined themselves becoming nothing more than someone you used to know. What they saw wasn't proof of anything, but the feeling it triggered exposed exactly what your soulmate is most afraid of losing now. That reminder had seemed ordinary to everyone else, but to your soulmate it felt painfully personal. They came across something that reminded them of a moment you once shared, a phrase, a familiar detail, something small enough that another person would have passed over it without thinking twice. But your soulmate stopped. For a few seconds, they were pulled back into the feeling of having you close enough to share ordinary things with. And then came the thought they couldn't shake: what if those moments belong completely to the past now? They imagined you building new memories, finding new reasons to smile, and slowly reaching a place where their absence no longer created any questions. That possibility unsettled them more than they expected. Not because they wanted to control your life, but because it forced them to recognize what their own waiting could cost. By the time someone opened their heart to them later today, your soulmate was already carrying that fear quietly. The conversation didn't create their feelings. It simply removed the excuses they had been using to avoid them. When they admitted this, the person beside them understood something immediately. "So you're not reaching out because someone told you to," they said. "You already wanted to. Today just made you stop denying it." Your soulmate looked down because that distinction mattered. They didn't want you to think another person had convinced them to care. Nobody had planted these emotions inside them. Nobody had suddenly made you important. The feelings were already there, buried beneath hesitation and unanswered questions. What this person did was hold up a mirror. They made your soulmate see that fear had been speaking louder than honesty for too long. Then your soulmate revealed another detail: there had been more than one moment recently when they nearly contacted you. Once, they even had the words ready, but backed away because they convinced themselves the timing wasn't right. And what makes the timing right now? The person asked. Your soulmate took a long breath before answering, because their response showed just how much had changed today. They said, "Maybe the right time isn't when I stop being afraid. Maybe it's when I finally decide the truth matters more than the fear." The person beside them smiled slightly, but didn't celebrate yet. There was still one problem. Your soulmate had written a message filled with explanations, regret, and honesty. But they suddenly realized something important was missing. They had told you why they disappeared emotionally. They had admitted what the distance taught them. They had even hinted that they wanted another conversation. But nowhere had they clearly told you what they feel when they think about you now. And without that, the message could still leave you guessing. Your soulmate read everything again, then placed their fingers over the screen and began adding a new sentence. This one took longer than all the others because there was nowhere left to hide behind careful language. They started with only 4 words, stopped, and looked at the person beside them. "If I say this, they'll know everything." The person answered, "Maybe that's exactly why you need to say it." And what your soulmate began typing next was the closest they had come to opening their entire heart to you. Those 4 words remained on the screen: "I still care deeply." Your soulmate stared at them because they knew those words could no longer be disguised as nostalgia or simple curiosity. They revealed that whatever happened between you had left a lasting place inside them. But after a few seconds, they realized even that sentence wasn't enough. It was true, yet it still felt safer than what they actually wanted to say. So they continued typing. They explained that thinking about you still brings emotions they haven't been able to replace with indifference. They admitted that there are moments when they wonder what you're doing, whether you're happy, and whether you ever think about the unfinished things between you. Then they stopped again. The person beside them noticed and asked, "Why are you hesitating now?" Your soulmate whispered, "Because if I finish this, I can't pretend anymore." And that was exactly the point. Today had brought them to a place where pretending was beginning to hurt more than honesty. The person who had opened their heart earlier didn't tell your soulmate what to write. Instead, they asked them to imagine you reading the message alone. What is the one thing you would never want them to misunderstand again? Your soulmate's answer came quickly: they never wanted you to believe that you were easy for them to forget. That was the misunderstanding their silence may have created, and it was the one they most desperately wanted to correct. They admitted there were times when they deliberately kept themselves from checking in because they feared one conversation would bring every feeling rushing back. But avoiding you hadn't erased those feelings. It had only kept you from knowing they existed. Your soulmate looked almost frustrated with themselves as they finally said, "I thought staying quiet would make this simpler. I think I only made it harder for both of us." Then they added that exact thought to the message. Now it wasn't just an explanation anymore. It was becoming a confession. And there was still one question they desperately wanted to ask you. They wanted to know whether you would be willing to hear everything, not through hints, not through carefully chosen fragments, but in a real conversation where both of you could finally stop guessing. Your soulmate typed the question, read it slowly, and this time they didn't erase it. Their finger moved closer to sending the message. The person beside them remained completely silent, understanding that this decision had to belong to your soulmate alone. Then something unexpected happened. Your soulmate pulled their hand back and said, "There's one more thing I need to tell them first." It wasn't another apology. It wasn't another explanation for the past. This was about something they had decided today, after hearing another person open their heart and realizing how quickly unspoken feelings can become permanent regrets. They took a breath and began adding one final truth to the message, a truth about what they are prepared to do differently if you allow that door to open again. And the decision behind those words could change the entire direction of what happens between you next. This time, your soulmate didn't hesitate because they were confused. They hesitated because they finally knew exactly what they wanted to say. "If you give me the chance to speak with you again, I won't hide behind silence." They typed the sentence slowly, then left it untouched. No deleting. No replacing it with something safer. That decision carried more weight than an apology because it wasn't only about correcting yesterday, it was about changing what they would do tomorrow. Your soulmate understood that asking you to reopen a door meant accepting responsibility for walking through it honestly. They couldn't disappear the moment emotions became uncomfortable. They couldn't expect you to keep interpreting mixed signals while they protected themselves from vulnerability. The person beside them read their expression and asked, "Are you ready to prove that with actions, not just words?" Your soulmate answered yes, but then added something unexpected. They said they weren't expecting you to immediately trust everything they said. If their silence had created doubt, they understood that one message couldn't magically remove it. What they wanted was the opportunity to show you that today's realization was real. And for the first time, their fear of being vulnerable seemed smaller than their fear of losing that opportunity completely. Then your soulmate read the entire message from beginning to end. It contained everything they had avoided for so long. Why they stepped back, what the distance taught them, how often they had thought about reaching out, and why someone opening their heart today finally forced them to confront their own. But when they reached T,